A former Buc has little to no confidence in the Buccaneers this year, but he's wrong. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
Your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Tuesday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every single day. And don't forget, you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, not joined by Evan Klosky of 10 Tampa Bay or David Harrison of BucsGameDay.com. Well, that's right. You can find them on Twitter at DHarrison82, at eKlosky, WTSP. We are all credentialed media members covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and you can find the show at Locked On Bucs. I am the deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com, and you can check out all my written work there. We are here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers. We want to share our appreciation for your continued support of the show. On today's episode of Locked On Bucs, one player is sick of all the doubt about this team, while PFF basically hates all things Buccaneers when it comes time for your fantasy draft. If you haven't drafted already, I know a lot of them are coming up in the next couple weeks. Well, Pro Football Focus hates your favorite team, but we need to start things off with a former Tampa Bay Buccaneer, and I am talking about the one, the only Booger McFarland. Now, Booger decided to talk a little bit about this iteration of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the post-Tom Brady era, the Baker era, the Trask era, whatever you want to call it. He basically says they stink. And he's not buying into them at all. He's basically said that internally they are probably trying to be bad. So Booger had a few quotes that I'm gonna throw at you here, and then I'm gonna react to them because, well, I'll get to that in a moment. But Booger McFarland said, quote, "That just shows you that they don't feel they have, to me, the long-term solution at quarterback. However you want to phrase it, I think the best thing for the Buccaneers right now is to be entertainingly bad." He went on to say, quote, "The next year's class of quarterbacks, they got some franchise quarterbacks based on where they are now in their career. We know what Baker Mayfield is. Kyle Trask is coming along. If you're Tampa Bay, you want to be entertaining enough to get fans in the stadium, but bad enough to get a high pick where you can get the franchise quarterback. Don't spin your wheels trying to make Baker Mayfield something he hasn't been, or Kyle Trask something he's not, which is a franchise quarterback." End quote. All right. First and foremost, I have a few issues with this. Now, Booger McFarland, radio personality in Tampa for a very long time, moved his way up the ranks. He is now an analyst for ESPN. He's not a commentator anymore because we all know how super duper he was at that job when he had that opportunity. But look, we don't know what Kyle Trask is. We don't know if he's a franchise quarterback. Now, I'll give Booger the benefit of the doubt. Probably not. If he's a franchise quarterback, chances are he would be basically given that opportunity to be that franchise quarterback for the Buccaneers. Instead, they bring in Baker Mayfield. Maybe Kyle Trask ends up being the starter for the Bucs partway through the season, really takes off and gets his opportunity to start for them next year. We don't know. It is a complete and total unknown. I have my opinions. Our listeners have their opinions. Those opinions are all going to differ. But one thing is for certain is that none of us are certain because we haven't seen Kyle Trask get the opportunity to be the starting quarterback for an NFL franchise, period. That is an indisputable fact. And you're not going to know what he is until he gets that opportunity. So there's my piece on Kyle Trask. As far as his comments regarding Baker Mayfield, we know what Baker Mayfield is. Okay, here's what we know of Baker Mayfield. He was a Heisman winner. He was the number one pick in the draft. He won a playoff game for the Cleveland Browns for the first time in over 3 decades, suffered through an injury and was traded away from Cleveland, landed on a fiery, engulfed, sinking ship that was the Carolina Panthers, and then shipped off to Los Angeles. Last year, we're going to call the lost year. So what we know is Baker Mayfield has been a successful starting quarterback in this league. Baker Mayfield has been a playoff winning quarterback in this league. So if that's what we know about Baker Mayfield, doesn't seem all that bad. Does he take risks? Does he make mistakes? Does he turn the ball over a little more than you would like your quarterback to? Absolutely. Those things are also true. But we also know that he has been successful as a starter in this league. So that's what we know about Baker Mayfield. I don't know what he's talking about when it comes to making Baker Mayfield something he hasn't been, because let's be honest, Baker Mayfield was the best starting quarterback the Browns have had basically since they moved to Baltimore and then came back in the NFL. Again, first playoff win in 30 years. So again, I have my issues with how Cleveland handled the situation. They can dislike Baker, or they can decide that they want to move on from Baker all they want. That's fine. That's cool. Whatever. That's up to you, Cleveland. The way they handled it by not stepping in and having him not play when he was trying to fight through an injury to help the football team, that's a management issue. And then they jettison him out of town to Carolina in exchange for Deshaun Watson, the poster boy of model behavior. So management and decision-making capabilities come into question when referring to the Cleveland Browns. So if that's what Booger meant by making Baker Mayfield something he hasn't been in a franchise quarterback, again, Baker, just like with Booger, just like with Kyle Trask, where we don't know, I'm going to say you're wrong on this, because Baker had an opportunity. He proved he could get the job done and then had a down year, which was used as an excuse to kick him out of town. So all of this is to say Booger needs to chill out, because Jason Light does not want to sit there and essentially tank the season for a chance to get a franchise quarterback. The last time the Buccaneers had a chance at a franchise quarterback, that didn't go so well either. Yes, I'm talking about Jameis Winston. Apologies to Florida State fans who are still upset about that. But Jameis wasn't the answer. There was no sure thing. You don't know if you're going to get a franchise quarterback when you draft one in the first round. As for, Booger trying to make his point that, the Bucs are essentially trying to be entertainingly bad. Jason Light not trying to lose after Tom Brady leaves. Todd Bowles, he's basically sitting there with his last chance to be a bona fide head coach in the National Football League. His time with the Jets didn't go so well. His first season with the Bucs with Tom Brady went disastrously bad. Again, not entirely his fault. Byron Leftwich was in over his head. All the injuries piled up, didn't add up to a successful season. But Todd Bowles is not trying to land a top 5 pick in what is surely his last opportunity to be a head coach in the NFL if this doesn't go well. Baker Mayfield, not trying to prove any of his critics right that he's not a starter in the NFL at the quarterback position, that he can't be a playoff quarterback, that he can't be a franchise quarterback. You are putting all of these things together and saying, yeah, Bucs, you should go stink so that maybe you can draft Caleb Williams or Drake May, and maybe they work out. That's not happening. The Bucs are not out here trying to be entertainingly bad. They are out here trying to win a wide open NFC South, and they're doing so with talent on this roster. The quarterback is not the entire team. And quite frankly, I'm not going to go full soapbox, but quite frankly, I'm a little sick of people acting like the quarterback is the entire team. That just because Tom Brady retired and left the team, all of a sudden, Mike Evans stinks, Chris Godwin stinks, Vita Vea stinks, Levante David, Devin White, Carlton Davis, Jamel Dean, Antoine Winfield Jr., Ryan Jensen, Tristan Wirfs, all these guys completely and totally stink because Tom Brady's not around anymore. It's crap. So, Booger, we can revisit this come January, come February. By all means, if you happen to watch this or listen to this, open invitation for you to come on this show anytime you would like to and discuss these comments, whether it's before the season starts or after the season starts. I invite you, sir. Come on. One guy that is going to disagree with you that holds a lot more weight than I do is a current Bucs player that has absolutely no interest in proving Booger McFarland right. That's next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Iyer to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. Whether you're prepping for a draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you players that are a guaranteed fit on your roster. So with draft prep underway for the upcoming season, let's see who Vinny has picked out for us in this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. Looking for a safe quarterback to take as a starter late after you wait on the position? Then you can ride with Vikings Kirk Cousins, one of the most consistent, healthiest, and most reliable passing producers. Cousins has great weapons in year two of a pass-happier offense under Kevin O'Connell. From Justin Jefferson to rookie Jordan Addison, he'll once again drive a team well that is loaded first at other positions. Vinny Iyer from Locked On Fantasy Football is going to help you win your fantasy championship, and eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being the perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. With eBay Motors Guaranteed Fit, over 122 million parts and accessories for your vehicle right at your fingertips, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Air filters, brakes, batteries, taillights, alternator, shocks, struts, you name it, eBay Motors has it. And they'll make sure it's the right fit for your car, because eBay Guaranteed Fit helps you understand exactly what part you need for your vehicle the first time. I just bought my brakes and rotors. I got the little green check mark saying these fit your vehicle, and they were on my doorstep in under a week. It was fantastic. Absolutely phenomenal service. All thanks to eBay Motors. So go for it, switch gears, crank the AC, say goodbye to sweating if your ride needs a little fixing up, because now you know you'll always be set up for success from the get-go. With eBay Guarantee Fit, everything your vehicle is calling for is just a click away. For the parts and accessories to fit your vehicle, just look for the green check. Get the right parts, the right fit, the right prices at ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. Everydayers, be sure to check in tomorrow. David has a special guest lined up to talk about his thoughts on the Bucs and where he sees them after that first preseason game, heading into the second preseason game. Oh, and by the way, that lone joint practice with the Jets will have happened by the time they speak, so I'm sure there will be plenty of takeaways from that one. Talked about Booger McFarland and how he's a big old negative Nancy, putting a whole lot of negative into my positive world, and I don't appreciate it. You know who else doesn't appreciate it outside of our everydayers that are probably sick of hearing about Booger McFarland, or sick of hearing Booger McFarland talk for that matter? Mike Evans. And yeah, as I mentioned in segment one, this guy's opinion seems to hold a whole lot more weight than my own. Even though I talk for a living, Mike plays for a living. He's around these guys. He's a Super Bowl champion. He is constantly living rent-free in the minds of Saints fans because they can't get over the fact that The Bucs Mike is better than the Saints Michael, as somebody corrected on the Twitter when someone referred to him as a Mike. Oh, it's Michael. Yeah, well, enjoy him for 3 games. Nobody likes Michael Thomas anyway. But Mike Evans, who everybody loves, was speaking with ESPN's Jeremy Fowler. And they were talking about the upcoming season, the loss of Tom Brady. We have to go through all that again. And rebuilding was brought up to Mike, to which he responded, quote, "Rebuilding, we are just trying to win right now. I don't know why people don't see that. Win the division. After that, people can take care of themselves." End quote. Thank you. That's all I have to say to Mike Evans. Thank you. The biggest thing that sticks out to me in that is when he says we are trying to win right now. I don't know why people don't see that. He's talking to you, Booger McFarland. Look, we can argue, debate, disagree on the quarterback situation all day long. People have their opinions. Some people think Baker's the right choice. Some people think Trask is the right choice. Some people say the Bucs are screwed either way. You can debate that all you want. Here's what you're really not going to debate. The NFC South was the worst division in football last year. Period. You can debate it. Spoiler alert, you're wrong. The NFC South, I will say it again, was the worst division in the NFL last year. Could the AFC South be worse than the NFC South this year? Absolutely. Houston, still going to be terrible. CJ Stroud, not the answer. You all, our everydayers, know that I'm going to say that. The Tennessee Titans, yeah, they drafted Will Levis. Tannehill's going to get the start. Your entire offense is Derrick Henry, great head coach. Mike Vrabel, I don't know how he hasn't won every Coach of the Year award since he became the Titans head coach. He's done a phenomenal job. I can't remember the last time I saw somebody do more with less than what Vrabel is doing in Tennessee. But when you really break it down, they're not that good of a football team. Indianapolis Colts, I think they got the best quarterback in the draft. I think Anthony Richardson, his ceiling is the highest of any quarterback in that draft. At the same time, his floor is the lowest of any quarterback in that draft. So we'll see which side of the spectrum he lands on. But the Colts, overall, not a great football team. Got some drama. The running back and the owner apparently hate each other. It's a little bit of an issue. So they're going through some issues. Jacksonville, I like Jacksonville. I think they're solid. I think Trevor Lawrence is a really good quarterback. I think they have a great coaching staff. I think they have a good defense. Wide receivers, we'll see. Calvin Ridley, he was okay with Atlanta. Zay Jones, it's really good running back, really good tight end. So they're kind of the class of the division. So yeah, Jacksonville could end up winning the division with 11 wins, but the rest of the division could end up being 6-11. So you take a look at where the Buccaneers are. They're in a division with Derek Carr. Yeah, he was the best free agent quarterback out there. I would say that we know who Derek Carr is at this point. We know his ceiling. We know his floor. And Baker Mayfield, he can be the exact same quarterback. Saints have a good defense. The Bucs have a good defense. Saints have good weapons. The Bucs have good weapons. So you look at those two from a talent aspect, they're really not too different. You take a look at Atlanta. They brought in a lot of pieces. They made a lot of additions. Desmond Ridder, massive unknown. Massive unknown. I liked him at UC. Let's see how he does as a full-time starting quarterback in the NFL. Let's see how he adapts. Let's see how they work the offense. Bijan Robinson's probably going to be something special. Kyle Pitts, massive disappointment and bust. You really don't know what the Atlanta Falcons are. Carolina Panthers, same thing. I'm not huge on Bryce Young. It's just, I don't see it. I would have taken him over CJ Stroud, no doubt about that. But this isn't like, the Panthers just drafted Joe Burrow. Like, okay, your top weapons on offense are old and busted Adam Thielen and DJ Chark and Miles Sanders. Like, that's not putting fear into anybody, right? Especially within the division. So you have a division that's wide open, and the Bucs are arguably one of the two most talented teams on both offense and defense within that division. Why should Mike Evans sit there and confirm what Booger McFarland is spewing instead of saying, we can win? All we have to do is win the division. And it was the worst division in football last year, and we won it. Yes, regardless of which side of the quarterback debate you're on, it's a downgrade from Tom Brady. But you know what? Dave Canales might be an upgrade over Byron Leftwich now, won't he? And if he's enough of an upgrade, you can withstand the downgrade at one position if the offense is actually moving the ball, isn't predictable, and here's a novel thought, they score points. So I've finally reached my breaking point here that I'm so beyond sick and tired of people acting like Tom Brady was the entire football team, like Booger McFarland was, that it was refreshing to see what Mike Evans said about, no, forget rebuilding. We're not rebuilding anything. We are competing to win the division for a third straight season, to get to the postseason for a fourth straight season. And once you're in the playoffs, anything can happen. Speaking of playoffs, a lot of you are gearing up and hoping that you are going to make your fantasy football playoffs, but there is one ranking that pretty much hates every single Buccaneer out there. We will talk about that coming up next here on Locked On Bucs. Wrapping things up here on a Tuesday edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast. James Yarcho, deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. And Pro Football Focus has released their top 400, yes, top 400 fantasy football rankings, and it is not favorable for the Buccaneers or people looking to draft Bucs players. Or maybe it is favorable for those looking to draft Bucs players. It kind of depends on how you look at it. But you got to think, typically teams or leagues are about 12 teams. Usually somewhere in the 16 to 18 round range. So you're looking at about 100 to 200 players being drafted. Maybe sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. But overall, you're looking at about, we'll say, 200 players that go in a fantasy draft. PFF's rankings of Buccaneers players among their top 400 include, 3, 6, 9, 11 players. 11 players in the top 400. Now, we just established that generally there's about 200 players drafted. So that would leave the Buccaneers with 4 players that would actually be drafted in your standard league. Starting the number 1 rated player for the Buccaneers by PFF, Rachaad White, coming in at number 57. Chris Godwin comes in at 68. Mike Evans comes in at 72. And then Chase Edmonds comes in at 200. Yes, 200. There is a 128 player gap between Mike Evans and the next Buccaneer on the list. Rounding out the rest of their list, at 212 is Keyshawn Vaughn, 214 is Russell Gage, 246 is Cade Otten, 261 is the Buccaneers defense, 302 is Baker Mayfield, 331 is Kyle Trask, and finally 381 is Chase McLaughlin. Not even the Goggles gang, Rodrigo Blankenship, not in the top 400. Here are some of my issues with this list. First and foremost, I don't have access to be able to see how many running backs are ahead of Rachaad White. But I have to imagine there are multiple backs ahead of Rachaad White that are part of a legitimate RBBC. For those of you that don't know what that means, running back by committee. We're talking about guys that are going to share a lot of snaps. You take a look at the situation in New Orleans where you have Alvin Kamara and you think, oh, that's a great pick. He catches the ball. He runs the ball. Yeah, well, now he's got 5 other running backs on that team that he's going to have to share the ball with, including the player that led the NFL in rushing touchdowns last year. You have a situation with the Jets. I would be willing to bet that both Dalvin Cook and Breece Hall are ranked above Rachaad White. If not, it's because the rankings were done before Dalvin Cook had a team. There's going to be a lot of situations like that. Rachaad White is a player that I have been scooping up in a lot of fantasy drafts because by time it gets to the point that I'm drafting a running back, I usually go wide receiver heavy early on. He's the only one that isn't part of a massive timeshare. He is a legitimate, clear-cut RB1 for his football team. So I'm getting him in the 6th or 7th rounds of drafts, and I know that he's going to get double the opportunity of any other running back being taken around him because those guys are all second fiddle to running backs that have already been drafted. But because they're on high scoring offenses, they get scooped up and it's like, oh, it's the Bucs. Nobody's going to pay attention. As for Chris Godwin and Mike Evans coming in at 68 and 72, get out of here. Get out of here with that nonsense. I've seen so many drafts. Deontay Johnson should not be going ahead of either Chris Godwin or Mike Evans. Mark my words, George Pickens is going to be their wide receiver 1 by week 5. He is going to absolutely destroy all of Deontay Johnson's stats this year. George Pickens is going to be the dude there. Wide receivers in Kansas City, you don't know whose turn it is to get the ball. You've got, multiple options in Miami, multiple options in Philadelphia. And yeah, you got multiple options here. If you're in a PPR, Chris Godwin is going to get a ton of targets. If you draft Mike Evans, by the end of the year, you got 1,000, you probably got 7 or 8 touchdowns. I cannot imagine that there are 67 players on this list that are going to end up scoring more points than Chris Godwin by the end of the year. And I can't imagine that there's 71 players that are going to end up scoring more points than Mike Evans by the end of the year. It's just weird to me. And then to have Russell Gage, the number 3 receiver, and I do get it from the aspect of he was hurt a lot last year, but all the way down at 214. I mean, really, you would rank Keyshawn Vaughn, who's probably going to get 10% of the running back touches this season, above Russell Gage? No, I don't think so. And then finally, I'm going to wrap this up with Cade Otten. Look, for those of you entering the world of fantasy for, let's say it's your first year, let's say it's your second year, let me tell you something. And David will come on here and disagree with me, and that's okay because he's wrong. There are 5 tight ends. 5. There's, in no particular order, there's Travis Kelce, there's George Kittle, there's Mark Andrews, there's Evan Ingram, and there's, I know I'm missing one, probably Darren Waller. Like, outside of those 5, and you might even be able to argue it down to 4. Basically, anybody after Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews and George Kittle. Tight end is a vast wasteland of nothingness. You could start Cade Otten. You could start Hayden Hurst. You could start TJ Hawkinson. You could start Kyle Pitts. You can start any of these guys. They're all the same. Every one of them. They're all touchdown dependent in fantasy. Every single one. Unless you have one of those top tier guys, the Travis Kelce's of the world, your tight end is irrelevant. You could drop and pick up a new tight end every single week and probably end up with the same results. Every other tight end that isn't the number one or number two option on a football team is interchangeable in fantasy football. All that matters is if they score a touchdown, because that's the only way you're getting any points. The cheat code is, of course, Diet Tebow, because he'll get carries and he'll get to throw the ball, might score you more points. But overall, tight ends are pretty much worthless in fantasy anymore unless you have Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, or George Kittle. So, again, you could take this as a slight against the Buccaneers, or you could take advantage of it if you're in a fantasy draft with people that do not listen to this show or are not Buccaneers fans, and they're going to say, oh, the Bucs lost Brady, they stink. And now you're going to get a guy like Rashad or Chris or Mike in the 6th, 7th, 8th round, well after they should have already been drafted. And now all of a sudden you're going to look like a genius because they're putting up serious points and they are top 20, top 24 at their position by the end of the season. With that, I'm going to bid you all a fair adieu. Please, if you have any reactions, thoughts, comments, anything at all, drop them in the YouTube comments, or you can email us at lockedonbuckspodcast@gmail.com. Make sure you are coming back tomorrow to check out David and who he has lined up as a special guest to talk about the Bucs. I'm sure they'll talk about the joint practices, reactions to the preseason game, looking ahead to the next preseason game against the New York Jets. But one more time, I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day, for making us part of your day, part of your routine. And of course, if you would like to discuss anything else, you can find us on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at JYarcho_Bucs, and at DHarrison82. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. Thank you so much for joining us right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.